The text message came just after our glittering family gala, the one I'd saved from disaster. It was from my mother. Don't call or come over, we're done. I'm Amelia Wilson, and I'm the secret architect holding my family's heritage homes together. I'm the one who pays for my mother's treatments and covers my brother's catastrophic mistakes. But I just discovered the truth hidden in a secret server. I know where the money is really going. They think I'm the family's safety net. They're about to find out I'm the one who cuts the rope. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Let's begin. The chandeliers at the Northwood Ballroom were dazzling, catching the light off 300 champagne flutes. From the outside, the Wilson Heritage Gala is the heart of Northwood. It's the event of the year, a celebration of my family's contribution to this town. From the inside, I'm the one doing CPR. I'd just spent 20 minutes calming down a furious catering manager. The salmon order was late while simultaneously placating Mayor Thompson, who was getting restless. "It's on its way, sir. Our apologies." I'd promised, smiling until my face ached. I fixed it. I always fix it. Across the polished floor, my brother Julian was laughing loudly, one hand clasped on the mayor's shoulder, taking credit for the save. For 20 years, my family's name has been on every luxury build, every historic restoration. But what people don't see is that I'm the one holding the blueprints, and my brother Julian is the one taking the credit. And my father Marcus, he just sees the son he always wanted and the daughter he always needed. Julian saw me, his charm dialed to 11, and strode over. "Millie, you're a lifesaver," he whispered, gripping my arm. "Listen, I need you to cover my supplier bill with Cascadia lumber this month. Just fold it into your design budget. I'll make it right." I nodded, the lie sitting like lead in my stomach. He wouldn't. He never does. My mother Eleanor drifted over, her pearls immaculate, her smile perfectly strained. "Darling, you look tired," she said, dabbing my forehead with a silk napkin, avoiding the topic of the catering disaster I'd just averted. But the mayor just adored Julian's speech. She beamed as if he'd written it himself. "You wrote that for him, didn't you? You've always been so supportive." I didn't answer, my eyes scanning the room for the next fire. The applause started and I turned. My father Marcus was on the stage, microphone in hand. "We build homes," he boomed, his voice filling the room with pride. "But more than that, we build legacy. A legacy I am proud to one day pass on. To my son Julian." The crowd cheered. Marcus smiled, raising a glass to Julian, not even glancing in my direction. I slipped out the side door before I suffocated. Later that night, back in my apartment, the silence was a physical weight. The gala dress was puddled on the floor, a shimmering, empty skin. I sat at my desk, the laptop's glow harsh in the dark, reviewing invoices. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the familiar bone-deep exhaustion. There it was, the Cascadia lumber bill. Julian hadn't just asked for me to cover it. He'd already submitted it to my accounts, dated 3 days ago, $50,000. It was the third emergency this quarter. My stomach tightened. I clicked over to my personal banking app, the numbers blurring. My mother's experimental medical treatments weren't cheap, and I'd been paying for them out of pocket for 6 months, submitting the invoices to the company for reimbursement. The reimbursements never came. My savings, the money I earned from my designs, the money I'd earmarked for my own small community project, were bleeding dry. I was funding the family legacy, and I was being bled white. Just as I was about to close the laptop, my phone lit up on the desk. It was from Mom. "Amelia, your father and I have made a final decision on the estate plan. Don't call or come over tomorrow. We think it's best if you're not here for the signing. We're done with this discussion." I read it once, twice. My blood went cold. "Done with what discussion?" I whispered to the empty room. "We haven't even had one." The words on the screen seemed to vibrate. "We're done with this discussion." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. "What discussion?" I said again, this time aloud. The air in my apartment felt thin, static. I snatched the phone and hit my mother's contact. straight to voicemail. I called my father, straight to voicemail. This wasn't a brush off. This was a slammed door. A cold, prickling dread crawled up my spine. I grabbed my keys, didn't bother changing out of my sweats, and was in my car in 30 seconds. The 10-minute drive to my parents' house, the house I helped design the new wing for, felt like an hour. Every red light was a personal insult. When I pulled up to the long drive, my stomach hollowed out. The main gates, the huge wrought iron ones, were closed. They were never closed. I pressed the intercom, the familiar buzz sounding hollow. Nothing. I pressed it again, holding it down. Mom, Dad, it's me. Amelia, open the gate. The only answer was the wind rustling the oak trees that lined the drive. This was a fortress, and I was on the outside. Humiliation and panic warred inside me. I sat there in my car engine ticking, staring at the impassive iron bars. I had one last option. I dialed Chloe. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and then a click. Amelia? Her voice was a bare whisper, high and tight with fear. Chloe? What the hell is going on? Why are the gates closed? Why is no one answering? I can't talk, she hissed. I heard muffled movement, the sound of a door closing. Julian's right here. He's upset about something at the office. Upset, Chloe, my mom just texted me. Meet me. She cut me off, her voice cracking. The Java Hut on Elm. 20 minutes. I have to go. The line went dead. The Java Hut was 3 blocks away. I got there in 5 and sat in a back booth, my leg bouncing so hard the table shook. The smell of roasted coffee beans, usually comforting, turned my stomach. She rushed in exactly 20 minutes later, looking over her shoulder. She wasn't the polished, put-together woman I knew from family dinners. Her hair was a mess, her eyes wide and bloodshot. Amelia, oh God, she said, sliding into the booth. She was shaking so hard she slopped her coffee onto the table. Chloe, talk to me. What is happening? She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at the spilled coffee, her hands clenched in her lap. They're cutting you out, Amelia. The words hung in the air, blunt and heavy. What? All of it. The estate, the business. They're cutting you out. Completely. My breath hitched. How? Why? Julian, she whispered, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. He went to Marcus yesterday. He told him your pro bono work, that community center you're designing. He told him it was a conflict of interest. He said you were trying to steal clients, that you were building your own firm behind their backs to compete with them. The accusation was so absurd, so fundamentally wrong, that I almost laughed. That's insane. Dad knows I would never. He believes him, Amelia. They had the lawyers in this morning. They signed the new estate plan. She finally looked at me, her eyes swimming in pity and terror. Julian gets 100% of the business assets. 100%. I repeated the words, feeling like ash in my mouth. What about me? You get the lake house. I blinked. The lake house. The small, rundown cabin we hadn't used in a decade. That's it. Chloe grabbed a napkin, her knuckles white. Amelia, the lake house isn't an asset. It's a liability. Julian, he took out 3 mortgages on it over the last 2 years without telling anyone. It's worthless. You're inheriting debt. The room tilted. The pieces clicked into place with sickening speed. The $50,000 invoice, the constant emergencies, the missing reimbursements for Mom's treatments. He's been gambling again, I stated. It wasn't a question. Chloe nodded, a fresh wave of tears choking her. Badly. Worse than ever. He's in deep, Amelia. He's terrified. The sorrow that should have hit me lasted only a second. It was instantly burned away by a cold, glacial rage. My panic vanished, replaced by a sharp, sudden focus. I wasn't a victim. I was a problem solver, and this was the biggest damn problem I'd ever faced. How is he hiding it from Dad? I asked, my voice steady, almost calm. Chloe looked startled by my tone. What? The money. Say the wall. The business is bleeding. Dad watches the numbers like a hawk. How is he hiding millions in losses? He has 2 sets of books, she stammered. The real ones. They're on a private server. He... Oh God, Amelia. He's been blaming all the losses on your projects. He's been telling your father that your extravagant design costs and supplier overruns are draining the company. The audacity of it, the sheer venomous insult. He wasn't just stealing from the family, he was destroying my reputation, my work, my name to cover his tracks. I need to see those books, I said. I need proof. Amelia, you can't. The server is locked down. I need proof, Chloe. He's at a conference in Reno all weekend, she said, her voice dropping again. The office is empty. I have a key. For emergencies. Chloe's key trembled in the lock, the click echoing in the 2 a.m. silence like a gunshot. We slipped inside, plunging the lobby into darkness behind us. The air in a corporate office at that hour is thick, heavy, and dead. This was my cathedral, the place I'd sketched out my future, the place I'd poured my life into. And my brother had turned it into a crypt full of secrets. Chloe stood lookout by the main glass doors, a pale shadow against the city lights, while I moved to his office. I didn't bother with the lights. I sat in his chair. It felt greasy. I booted his machine. The password was his old high school football number. Pathetic. I was on his desktop in seconds. The company's main drive looked pristine, exactly as I'd organized it years ago. But I knew Julian. He wasn't smart, but he was devious. I ran a network scan. A hidden IP address pinged back, shielded. A private server physically located in the supply closet. He bought his own hardware, I muttered. I accessed it. The security was slightly better, but I'd built the company's original firewall. I knew its back doors because I'd put them there for maintenance. I was in. The file system was a chaotic mess, but I found what I was looking for, a folder labeled Invoices Actual. I opened it, then opened the main company drive's Invoices Paid. I put the 2 windows side by side on the monitor. My blood turned to ice water. Cascadia Lumber, the real invoice, $15,000. The paid invoice, the one he'd sent to my account, $50,000. He'd faked it. He'd faked all of them. My most trusted suppliers, the relationships I'd spent a decade building. He was siphoning millions, padding every single invoice and wiring the difference to a holding account. Oh my God, Chloe whispered from the doorway, her voice trembling. It's worse, I said. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I kept digging. A new folder, financing private. My stomach clenched so hard I tasted acid. Secondary loans, mortgages, on every company property. The downtown lofts, the new construction on Pine Street, even the office building we were sitting in. He was leveraging the company to the hilt, burying it in debt. Then I saw the scanned signature page for the Pine Street loan. My hand started to shake. It wasn't his signature, it was mine. Amelia Wilson, project manager, a clean, perfect forgery. He wasn't just stealing, he was setting me up to take the fall. He was using my signature, my professional authority, to commit wire fraud. Amelia, we have to go, Chloe pleaded, stepping into the office. We have enough. No, I said. My voice was hoarse. I had to see the whole picture. I had to know how deep the rot went. In the search bar I typed Eleanor. A single folder popped up, Eleanor Medical Daxelles. My heart stopped. I clicked it. It was a simple spreadsheet, but it told a story that suffocated me. I saw the lines for my payments, the transfers from my personal savings to Wilson Heritage. Payment received A, Wilson, $30,000. Payment received A, Wilson, $25,000. Payment received A, Wilson, $40,000. Then I saw the corresponding entries. Payment to Northwood Oncology Center, $30,000 paid. Payment to Northwood Oncology Center, $25,000 paid. But the routing number, it wasn't the hospital's. I didn't recognize it. I jammed my phone from my pocket, my fingers fumbling as I typed the number into a search. It wasn't a hospital. It was an offshore holding company. A shell corporation based in the Caymans. A known front for… oh God, no. I clicked another link. The holding company was the primary payment processor for Aces High International, an online casino. He wasn't just stealing from the company. He wasn't just framing me. He was stealing the money for his mother's cancer treatments. He was letting her think she was covered while he gambled away her life. That was it. The last thread of sisterly affection, the last scrap of shared history incinerated. I jammed my external hard drive into the USB port. Copying, I said, my voice dead. Amelia, please, we have to go now, Chloe said, her voice rising to a panic. I need it all, Chloe. I need the originals. I need everything. The progress bar crawled across the screen, 50%, 60%. My entire body was vibrating with a toxic mix of adrenaline and pure, undiluted hatred. 70%. Chloe was back at the main window. Amelia. 80%. Amelia, there's a car. I ignored her. 85%. Amelia, it's Julian. He's pulling in. Shit. He's not supposed to be here. He's in Reno. He's here. He's getting out of the car, she shrieked, backing away from the glass. 90%. I could hear the thunk of a car door slamming in the parking garage below. A key fumbled in the main building lock downstairs. He was drunk. I could hear him cursing, his voice slurred and angry as he fumbled with the lock. Yank the drive, Chloe whispered, tears streaming down her face, backing us both into the server room closet. Not yet. We were trapped. Trapped in the darkness, the tiny blue light on the hard drive blinking, blinking, blinking. The main office door, the one Chloe had failed to close, creaked open. A beam of light from a phone flashlight sliced through the darkness. Who the hell is in here? Julian slurred. Who the hell is in here? Julian's slurred voice echoed from the main office. The flashlight beam swept wildly, cutting through the dark. Chloe was hyperventilating beside me in the server closet, a high, thin whistling sound that was going to get us caught. The hard drive's blue light was still blinking. 95%, 98%, 100%. Copy complete. I didn't wait. I ripped the drive from the USB port just as Julian's shadow fell across his office doorway. I know someone's in here, he roared. He took a drunken step forward, and his foot caught the leg of the tall metal drafting lamp, my drafting lamp. There was a metallic shriek as it toppled, a crash of glass, as the bulb exploded on the hardwood floor, and Julian yelled in pain and surprise. That was our chance. Now! I grabbed Chloe's arm and yanked. We burst from the server room, sprinting for the hall. Hey! Julian bellowed behind us, scrambling to his feet. Stop! Stop, you bitches! We hit the emergency fire escape door, slamming the push bar with all our weight. The alarm erupted, a deafening clack, clack, clack that filled the night, a sound so loud it felt like it was inside my skull. We scrambled down the metal stairs, our footsteps banging and echoing in the narrow brick alleyway. I didn't look back. I just ran, dragging Chloe with me, the hard drive clutched so tightly in my hand my knuckles ached. We didn't stop running for 3 blocks, ducking into a dark alley as we heard his car screech out of the parking garage. His tires smoked as he peeled out, heading in the wrong direction. We got away. My apartment. 4:17 a.m. The sun wasn't even a rumor yet. I double-locked the door and slid the chain into place. Chloe collapsed onto my sofa, her body shaking in great, racking sobs. I ignored her. I walked to my desk, my temple pounding in time with the alarm I could still hear in my head. I plugged in the hard drive. My hands were perfectly steady. The rage had burned away, the panic leaving a cold, sharp, terrifying clarity. I worked for an hour, the only sound in the room Chloe's muffled crying and the click-click-click of my mouse. I built a new spreadsheet. I cross-referenced the forged loans, the faked invoices, the offshore transfers. I ran the numbers, and then I ran them again because they couldn't be right. But they were. When I was finished, I leaned back in my chair. The city was just beginning to stir, a pale, sickly gray light filtering through the blinds. "Chloe," I said. My voice sounded foreign, like it was coming from someone else. She looked up, her face puffy and stained with tears and mascara. "He didn't just take a few million?" I turned the monitor so she could see the final number at the bottom of my spreadsheet, the one in red, the one with all the parentheses. "He's bankrupted us. Wilson Heritage Homes is a hollow shell." She stared uncomprehending. "But the gala, the new projects, the mayor—" "It's all a lie." I said the words tasting like poison. "It's a house of cards. The loans, the suppliers. We're in default. We just don't know it yet. The legacy, the name, all of it, it's gone. He burned it all to the ground." The full, crushing weight of his betrayal settled on us. The gala, the community pride, my father's speeches. It was all a performance staged on a set that was already on fire. Chloe was still staring at the screen, mute, when my phone, discarded on the kitchen counter, began to ring. The sound was obscene in the quiet room. We both jumped. I walked over and looked at the screen. Mom, of course. Julian must have called them. I picked it up. "Hello, Mom." "Amelia?" Her voice wasn't soft or concerned. It was sharp, brittle, and furious. "Your brother just called. The office was broken into, the server room." "What did you do?" The accusation, the immediate assumption of my guilt, was the last straw. "What did I do?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's the question you're asking. Not, 'Amelia, are you okay?' Not, 'Amelia, what's wrong?' Don't play games, Amelia. Julian is hysterical. He said you broke in, you stole things. Ask him where your medical money is, Mom." Silence. Absolute, deafening silence on the other end of the line. I just waited. I heard a faint sound, a sharp intake of breath, a muffled sob. "Amelia!" Her voice, when it finally came, was a broken, trembling whisper. She knew. She'd known. He promised he'd pay it back, Amelia." She wept. He needs time. He got in over his head. He's your brother." "He's a thief, Mom. He's been stealing your cancer treatment money." "Your father? This would kill him." She pleaded, the words tumbling out desperate and clumsy. "You know how he feels about the legacy. If this gets out, it will destroy him. It will destroy all of us. You have to be quiet, please. It's for the family." The cold, hard truth of it finally landed. It wasn't about right or wrong. It wasn't about crime or betrayal. It was about image. It was about him. "You're sacrificing me to save him," I said. The realization didn't even hurt. It was just a fact. "Don't be so selfish," she shrieked, the mask of the victim dropping, replaced by a raw, desperate spite. "You've always been the strong one. You're strong. You can recover from this. He can't." I didn't say goodbye. I just ended the call. I set the phone on the counter. Chloe was looking at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of horror. "She knew," she whispered. I just nodded. I made coffee. I showered. I got dressed for work, pulling on my sharpest blazer. I ignored the 17 missed calls from my father, my mother, and Julian that came in while I was in the shower. I sat at my desk, the hard drive in my hand, and waited. At 9:02 a.m., a new text message appeared. It was from Mom. Julian had spent the last 5 hours spinning his story, painting me as the villain. "You ungrateful, spiteful child. After all we've given you, you're trying to ruin your brother. Don't call or come over. We're done." I read the words. "We're done." The same words from the night before, but now they weren't a mystery. They were a verdict. A life sentence. My sentence. I looked at the text, the words burning into my retina. A strange calm washed over me. The panic was gone. The grief was gone. There was nothing left but the truth. I took a deep breath. I typed back 2 words. Got it. I sent it. Then I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and called the first name on my favorites list. Michael, I said when he answered. It's Amelia Wilson. I need my lawyer. I need you right now. My lawyer Michael looked at the data on the hard drive, his face growing paler by the minute. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally looked up from his laptop, the professional mask was gone, replaced by a look of grim astonishment. Amelia, he said, his voice low. This isn't just theft. This is a dynasty-level implosion. What do you want to do? The old Amelia would have cried. She would have asked how to fix it, how to save everyone. That Amelia was gone, burned away by my mother's spite and my brother's greed. I didn't hesitate. I'm not going down with the ship. Michael allowed himself a small, thin smile. Good, because this isn't a ship. It's an anchor. Let's build your ark. For 2 days I didn't sleep. I was a general planning a war on 3 fronts, living on caffeine and a cold, clarifying rage. The first front was the suppliers. I rented a sterile conference room at the downtown Hilton. I summoned the heads of Cascadia Lumber, Northwood Steel, and the 3 other major suppliers Julian had been robbing blind. They walked in wary and suspicious, clearly expecting me to beg for an extension on my family's behalf. Michael stood by the door like a sentinel. I stood by the projector. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the heavy silence. I've called you here because as of this morning, Wilson Heritage Homes is insolvent. In approximately 30 days, my brother is going to file for bankruptcy, and he is planning to stiff every single one of you for millions of dollars. The anger in the room was palpable. That's a hell of an accusation, Amelia, said Robert Henderson from Cascadia. I've known your father for 30 years. And you've known me for 10, I countered. Have I ever lied to you? Have my designs ever been flawed? Have my invoices ever been wrong? I didn't wait for an answer. I clicked the remote. The spreadsheet I'd built lit up the wall, the projector humming. 2 columns side by side. Invoice paid the lie and invoice actual the truth. I showed them the faked letterheads. I showed them the doctored PO numbers. I showed them the transfer routing numbers to the Cayman accounts. Then I showed them the Pine Street loan application. My forged signature clear as day. Henderson went white. A quiet, vicious curse escaped his lips. That monster. He's using your name. He's using all of our names, I said. He's destroyed the Wilson credit line and he's about to default on your payments. You are all unsecured creditors. When this goes public, you will be at the back of the line. You will get nothing. The second front was the clients. I didn't wait for the suppliers to process. The next 48 hours were a blur. I met with the Hendersons and the Davies, the 2 biggest clients I had personally brought to Wilson Heritage. I sat in their multi-million-dollar living rooms I had designed, and I laid it all out. I am leaving Wilson Heritage. I told them, my voice flat, professional, and devoid of the family drama. I've discovered significant financial irregularities, but more importantly, I've found contractual breaches. I didn't just bring spreadsheets. I brought proof, affidavits from the suppliers, physical comparisons of the cheap, non-compliant composite decking Julian had used versus the custom-milled hardwood specified in my blueprints. Proof that the structural steel in their new wings wasn't the grade specified, meaning their homes weren't just compromised, they were potentially unsafe. Mrs. Davies looked like she was going to be sick. What do we do? You terminate your contract with Wilson Heritage for breach, I said, sliding a new folder across her marble coffee table. This is Aegis Design. It's my new firm. I will fix his mistakes at cost. I'll absorb the labor. You just pay for the new materials. They both signed before I'd even finished my coffee. They weren't just clients, they were victims. And I was the only one who could fix it. The third front was the consortium. I brought those new ironclad contracts back to the suppliers who were now simmering in a controlled rage. Wilson Heritage is dead, I told them. But these projects aren't. Aegis Design will complete them. But Aegis needs backing. It needs supply lines that won't freeze. Henderson saw the play instantly. You want us to back you? I want us to back each other, I corrected. I'm forming the Northwood Builders Consortium. You all become managing partners. You give Aegis an exclusive line of credit for materials. And in return, Aegis gives you exclusive guaranteed contracts on every project we just saved and every new one we sign. We save our community, we save our reputations, and we save our businesses. Julian built his legacy on lies. We'll build ours on the truth. It was done in an hour. We weren't just colleagues, we were an army. That night I finally crashed. I was in my apartment surrounded by legal pads and corporation documents and a mountain of empty coffee cups. The adrenaline was gone, leaving a hollow, aching exhaustion. My eyes landed on a silver frame on my bookshelf, a photo from last year's gala. Mom, Dad, Julian, and me. All of us smiling, our arms around each other. The perfect, successful, loving American family, a lie in a silver frame. For a second, a wave of profound, suffocating sorrow washed over me, not for them, but for the stupid, hopeful girl who had tried so desperately for so long to be good enough for that picture. The girl who had paid her mother's medical bills, covered her brother's debts, and worked herself to the bone, all for the approval of people who saw her as nothing but a tool. I saw the wasted years, the stolen money, the emotional sacrifice. I saw the selfish child my mother screamed I was. I picked up the frame, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it unceremoniously into the trash can. I didn't even watch it land. I was washing the grime off my hands when my phone rang, buzzing angrily on the granite counter. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another supplier. Hello, Ms. Amelia Wilson. The voice was male, flat, and official. Yes. Who is this? This is Detective Riley with the Northwood Police Department. Ma'am, I'm calling to inform you that we've received a formal complaint from your father, Marcus Wilson, alleging embezzlement from Wilson Heritage Homes by you. The conference room at Northwood Mutual Bank was on the top floor, all glass and cold chrome, a sterile, pressurized cage overlooking the town my family had supposedly built. The air was so thin and clean it burned my nostrils. Michael sat to my left, his briefcase on the table, his posture the definition of calm. I sat to his right, my back rigid, my hands clasped on the polished mahogany. I'd chosen my armor with care, a dark navy suit, sharp shoulders, my hair pulled back into a severe, unassailable knot. I would not show them a single flicker of emotion. This wasn't a family meeting. This was an execution. And everyone in the room was wondering who was holding the axe. They arrived together, a united front of deceit. Marcus, my father, his face a carefully constructed mask of weary, disappointed patriarchy. Eleanor, my mother, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant, clutching his arm as if for support, though it was clearly for show. And Julian, flanked by Martin, the family's ancient bulldog-faced lawyer. Julian wouldn't look at me. He looked puffy, hungover, and his leg was bouncing under the table, a frantic, jittery rhythm that was the only honest thing in their performance. Then the final pieces clicked into place. Mr. Harrison, the bank president, entered, his face grim, carrying a thin file. And right behind him, Detective Riley, his presence sucking all the remaining air out of the room. Please sit, Harrison said, his voice flat. He didn't gesture. He commanded. We were all here. The trap was set. The silence stretched thick and suffocating. I could hear the expensive ticking of my father's watch. Martin, the family lawyer, cleared his throat, the sound like gravel. We're here, he began, his jowls shaking, to discuss the unfortunate discrepancies In the Wilson Heritage accounts, my clients are prepared to be reasonable detective. This is clearly a family matter, an internal dispute. She stole from us, Julian blurted, his voice cracking too high too fast. She stole everything. She's been planning it for months. My father held up a hand, silencing him without a look. He turned his full, weighty attention to me. His eyes were full of a terrible, patronizing sadness. Amelia, he said, his voice quiet, as if we were alone, as if he were correcting a child who had colored on the walls. This tantrum has gone on long enough. I don't know why you're doing this. I don't know what you think you're proving. Just tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you'll put the money back. We can handle this quietly. We can still fix this. Put the money back. The sheer stunning audacity of it was a physical force, like a hand shoving me. I looked past the mask, past the disappointed father routine, and saw him for what he was, a man terrified of his image cracking. I met his gaze, and for the first time in my life, I felt nothing. No fear, no love, no desperation to please. Nothing. I didn't take any money, I said. My voice was as cold and clear as the glass walls around us. Julian snorted a wet, ugly sound. She's lying. Look at her. She's lying. She's been siphoning funds for months. She's been building a secret company. She's... He was starting to spiral, his voice getting louder, his eyes darting between the detective and the bank president. She's jealous. She's always been jealous of me. She wants to destroy what you built, Dad. That's enough, Michael said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but it cut through Julian's hysteria like a scalpel. The room went silent. Julian's mouth snapped shut. Martin, Michael continued, addressing their lawyer with polite professional disdain. You and I both know that embezzlement is a specific legal term. It implies an employee stealing from an employer. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single neat file. He didn't open it. He just placed it on the table. My client, Ms. Amelia Wilson, has never been a salaried employee, partner, or shareholder of Wilson Heritage. She has been operating per your client's own insistence as an independent contractor for her design services for the past 4 years. Her good faith invoices, however, appear to have gone unpaid for 18 months. Martin's eyes narrowed. He saw the first barb. What are you implying, Michael? I'm not implying anything, Michael said, sliding a second document across the table. I'm stating a fact. My client isn't an employee. She's a creditor. A rather large one, in fact. By our calculations, the largest one. That's ridiculous, Marcus boomed, his composure cracking. She's my daughter. She's family. Legally, Michael said, his voice still infuriatingly calm. She's a vendor who is owed at this moment $1.4 million in unpaid fees and services. But that's not why we're here, is it, Detective? He turned his gaze and the entire room's attention to Detective Riley. We're here because of the embezzlement complaint, the one my client supposedly perpetrated. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a third file. This one was thick. Which brings us to these. He fanned out copies of the loan applications, the Pine Street loan, the downtown lofts, the secondary mortgage on the office building we were sitting in. We find it curious that my client, a simple independent contractor, would have the authority to sign for these multi-million-dollar loans, and yet here is her signature. He slid a copy to my father and one to Detective Riley. I watched my father's face as he picked up the paper. He knew my signature better than his own. He'd taught me how to sign it. He looked at it. He saw the forgery. It was a good one, but it wasn't mine. His eyes lifted slowly and moved past me, to Julian. Julian, my father whispered. The name was a question, a plea. Detective Riley leaned forward. He wasn't a family friend. He wasn't a banker. He was a cop. His voice was suddenly very clear, very loud in the quiet room. "Mr. Wilson," he said, looking directly at Julian, "forging a signature on a federal loan application isn't a family matter. That's wire fraud. That's a federal charge." Julian's face went white. A slick, greasy sweat beaded on his forehead and upper lip. I don't. She set me up. She must have. She's the one who controls the design budgets. She's the one who faked them." "She faked them?" Michael asked, his voice laced with the first hint of mock surprise. "That's fascinating, because we were wondering how she managed to do that given that she hasn't had administrative access to the main servers for 2 years. Per your order, Marcus." My father flinched. "But gentlemen," Michael said, "why speculate?" He reached into his briefcase one last time and pulled out the small black external hard drive. It looked like nothing. It was everything. He walked to the head of the table where a large monitor sat dark and plugged the drive into the room's projector system. The screen on the wall, previously blank, flickered to life. My breath hitched. This was it. Michael's cursor clicked. "This," he said, his voice resonating with the finality of a judge's gavel, "is a copy of a hidden secondary server maintained by Mr. Julian Wilson. This is the real set of books." On the wall in 40-point font, my spreadsheet appeared. Column A, invoice paid. Column B, invoice, actual. Column C, difference, wired to Cayman Holding 144B. The air left the room. I could hear Julian's ragged, panicked breathing. That's fabricated. That's fake," Martin stammered, but the blood had drained from his face. He knew. "Is it?" Michael clicked again. The actual scanned faked invoices appeared side by side with the real ones, the doctored letterheads from Cascadia Lumber, the forged purchase order numbers, the routing numbers. "We've already cross-referenced these routing numbers with the casinos in Reno and their offshore processors," Michael said coolly, as if discussing the weather. "The money trail isn't just warm, it's scorching." I watched my family. Julian was vibrating, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish pulled from water. My mother was staring at the table, her hands knotted together so tightly her knuckles were white. She was rocking a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. My father was just staring at the screen. His face was gray, slack-jawed, uncomprehending. He looked like a man who had been shot but hadn't felt the bullet yet. "And then," Michael said, his voice dropping all pretense of civility gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger, "there's this." He clicked one last time. The file EleanorMedical.xls opened. It filled the screen. It was so simple. The line items of my payments in from my personal savings. Payment received A, Wilson $30,000. Payment received A, Wilson $25,000. Payment received A, Wilson $40,000. And right beside them, the corresponding line items out. Payment to Northwood Oncology, $30,000, paid. Except the routing number wasn't the hospital's. It was the same Cayman Holding account. That was the bullet. I saw my father flinch a physical recoil. He didn't look at the screen anymore. He didn't look at Julian. He turned his movement slow, stiff, agonizing, and he looked at my mother. He looked at Eleanor. His voice was a dry rattle, a sound I had never heard, a sound I will never forget. "Eleanor, you knew." It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. My mother's face crumpled. The defiant mask, the polished facade, it all shattered, leaving a terrified, hollow-eyed woman I didn't recognize. "Marcus, please." She whispered, her hand fluttering out, reaching for him. "Marcus, he's our son. He's your son. I just wanted to keep the peace. He said he'd pay it back. He promised." "He's a thief," my father whispered. The words were flat dead. They hung in the sterile air, absolute and final. He's a thief. He's not my son. That's when Julian broke. The illusion was gone. The family fortress was gone. There was nothing left to hide behind. He was a cornered animal, with a scream that was not human, a sound of pure primal rage. He lunged. He launched himself across the conference table, his hands outstretched, clawing, grabbing for me. "You bitch!" He roared, his face a purple mask of hate. "You did this. You ruined us. I'll kill you. I'll kill you." Michael and Martin were too slow, but Detective Riley wasn't. He had Julian in an armbar before he'd even cleared the table, yanking his arm back with a sickening pop and slamming him face down onto the mahogany. Julian shrieked in pain. "You're under arrest, Mr. Wilson," Riley grunted, pulling out handcuffs as Julian thrashed and sobbed, his spit and tears hitting the polished wood. "You have the right to remain silent." It was chaos. My mother was screaming a high, piercing wail. "No, no, not my boy, please!" Martin was yelling about bail, about police brutality. But through it all, Mr. Harrison, the bank president, hadn't moved. He'd just been watching the numbers on the screen. Now he spoke. His voice was cold, clear, and cut through the hysteria like a guillotine. Based on this staggering level of fraud, Wilson Heritage Homes is in total default. He looked at my father, who was still staring at my mother, his eyes dead, his face ashen. "We are calling every loan, effective immediately. The full balance is due." Martin, who had just gotten off the phone, threw his hands up, his face slick with sweat. "We can't pay it. Harrison, don't you understand? He's ruined. We're bankrupt." The final word, bankrupt. My father made a small sound, a soft, choking gasp. His hand, the one that had held up Julian's glass at the gala, went to his chest. His eyes rolled back, and Marcus Wilson, the patriarch, the man who built an empire on legacy, collapsed in his chair, a broken man. It was a Tuesday. It was raining. Not a gentle, cleansing rain, but a cold, miserable, bone-chilling Oregon drizzle that turned the gray concrete steps of the county courthouse a slick uniform black. The air smelled of diesel fumes and wet wool. A small, bedraggled crowd huddled under cheap umbrellas here to pick at the bones of the dead. Today, the bones were mine. Or rather, they had been. A harried-looking man in a cheap raincoat, the court-appointed bankruptcy trustee, stood on the top step, his voice tinny and metallic as he read from a damp sheaf of papers. "All right, people, let's get this done. We are here for the court-ordered auction of assets pertaining to Case 774B Wilson Heritage Homes. Sold as is where is. All sales final." He droned on, listing the assets. Trucks, equipment, office furniture. But he was just warming up. The main event was Lot 34. Lot 34, he called out, his voice cracking, is the business entity itself. The brand name, logo, goodwill, active contracts, and client lists of Wilson Heritage Homes sold as a single lot, subject to all liens and encumbrances. I stood at the edge of the small crowd, shielded by my own black umbrella. But I wasn't alone. To my left stood Robert Henderson, from Cascadia Lumber, his face grim, his posture solid as one of his own old-growth trees. To my right, Michael, my lawyer, and beside him, the other heads of the Northwood Builders Consortium. We were an island of dark suits and grim purpose. We weren't here to scavenge. We were here to execute a final necessary surgery. Across the wet plaza, under a small, inadequate umbrella held by a shivering, weeping Eleanor, stood the remnants. My family. My father, Marcus, looked hollow. The patriarch, the titan of industry, was gone. In his place was a gray, stooped old man in a wrinkled suit, staring at the auctioneer with dead eyes. My mother just stared at the ground, her face hidden, a picture of public-facing grief. And Julian, he was out on bail, awaiting his federal sentencing. He was vibrating, his hands jammed in his pockets, his face a blotchy purple mask of suppressed rage. He wasn't looking at the auctioneer. He was staring at me. His hatred was a physical thing, a palpable force I could feel even through the rain. I ignored him. I ignored them all. I was watching a man in a tan suit, a thin-lipped bottom feeder from a Portland liquidation firm. He'd been bidding on every lot. He was here to buy the name strip mine, the client list, sell off the contracts, and dissolve the rest. He was here for the final anonymous kill. "Do I have an opening bid for lot 34? The auctioneer cried, his voice laced with impatience. "Opening bid $50,000. $50,000, the liquidator shouted instantly. "I have 50. "Do I hear 60? 50,000. A man near the back, a local competitor I vaguely recognized, bid 60. 70, the liquidator snapped, not even blinking. 80? 100. The liquidator called out, his voice full of dismissive confidence. He was going to get this for pennies. He was going to buy my name, my work, my client list for less than the cost of one of my custom kitchens. The bidding stalled. The local competitor shook his head and stepped back. $100,000 for the legacy. My father's entire life. My entire life. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $100,000. A steal, folks. Going once. I saw my father flinch. His head snapped up, the deadness in his eyes replaced by a sudden, desperate panic. He saw the liquidator. He saw the end. "Going twice," my father broke. He broke away from my mother's clutching hand and stumbled across the wet stones right toward me. The rain plastered his gray hair to his skull. His expensive wool coat, the one he wore to the gala, was soaked, hanging off his frame like a shroud. He stopped a foot in front of me, his eyes wild, pleading. He didn't seem to notice the consortium. He only saw me. "Amelia," he gasped, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Millie, please." I said nothing. I just held his gaze. "Don't let this happen," he begged, grabbing my arm. His hand was freezing, his grip surprisingly strong, like a drowning man's. "Don't let him take it, that vulture. This is our name, Amelia. Your name." I stared at the hand on my arm, the hand that had signed me away, the hand that had held up a glass to toast my brother. "Please." He wept, tears mixing with the rain on his face. I'll fix it, I swear. We'll rebuild. I'll make you a partner, a full partner, just like you always wanted. Please, Millie, don't let this happen." A full partner. The words hung in the air, a cruel, bitter joke. The one thing I had craved, the one thing I had bled for, offered to me now, when he had nothing left to give. The old Amelia would have broken. She would have wept with him, offered him her savings, promised to fix it. But she was gone. I looked at his hand on my arm until he shamed let it drop. "You don't have a company to make me a partner in, Dad," I said. My voice wasn't cruel, it wasn't angry, it was just quiet. It was just the truth. "And my name is Amelia Wilson. It is not Wilson Heritage." His face crumpled. He didn't understand. He was a king with no kingdom, still trying to trade in a currency that had no value. He saw me as a daughter, as a tool, as a safety net. He didn't see the woman who had just built an army behind him. "Sold for 100,000, the auctioneer yelled. "Wait." My voice cut through the rain. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. The auctioneer froze his gavel in midair. The liquidator, who had been smirking, turned to look at me, his expression annoyed. My father was still staring at me, his mouth open, confused. I didn't look at any of them. I looked at Michael. He was already raising his paddle, a small, numbered piece of white plastic. "Aegis Design," Michael said, his voice deep and certain, carrying across the plaza, "on behalf of the Northwood Builders Consortium, bids $101,000. The liquidator's jaw dropped. He looked at me, at the circle of grim-faced, successful men standing with me. He saw Henderson. He saw the head of Northwood Steel. He saw who I was. He wasn't just bidding against a girl. He was bidding against the entire Northwood supply chain. He shook his head, snapped his briefcase shut, with a disgusted click and turned away. $101,000. The auctioneer crowed, his energy suddenly back. Going once, going twice. Sold. The gavel cracked a sharp, definitive sound like a bone snapping. Sold to Ms. Amelia Wilson. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. The only sound was the rain and the distant traffic. It was over. The name, the contracts, the legacy. It was all mine. I looked at Julian. His face was a mask of such pure, venomous hatred, I almost smiled. I looked at my father. He just deflated. The last bit of air of pride of legacy went out of him. He was just a wet old man, a hollow man. And then I did the most important thing I have ever done. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the past, on the betrayal, on the ghost of the girl who had begged for their approval. I turned to my future. I turned to Henderson, to Michael, to the men and women who had stood by me, who had trusted me. My new partners. My community. Let's get to work, I said. We began to move as one, a solid phalanx of purpose walking away from the courthouse. We were 2 steps clear when I heard her. How could you? My mother's voice. It wasn't a wail. It was a shriek, a raw, ragged sound of pure spite. I stopped. My partners stopped with me. I turned around slowly. She had broken away from my father and was marching toward me, her face a grotesque mask of tears and rage. She stopped and pointed a shaking, accusing finger at my face. How could you? She screamed, spittle flying from her lips. After all he did for you, after all we gave you, how could you buy your father's legacy just to destroy it? The question hung in the rain, so profoundly, fundamentally wrong, it almost took my breath away. She still didn't see. She still thought he was the victim, that I was the villain, that the name was the legacy and not the work. She saw me buying a prize just to smash it. She couldn't see I was performing a rescue. The old me would have screamed back. The old me would have listed every sacrifice, every stolen dollar, every night I'd stayed awake worrying about her about them. But I wasn't the old me. I was the new me, the me that had built an ark, the me that had just saved a dozen local businesses, the me that was finally blessedly free. I looked at my mother, at this crying, screaming, broken woman, and I felt nothing but a distant, cold pity. I'm not destroying his legacy, Mom, I said. My voice was calm, the calm at the absolute center of a storm. I'm ending his liability. I just bought the right to save this community from what you and Dad let Julian do. I'm saving the clients he defrauded and the suppliers he bankrupted. I took a step closer and she flinched. You sent me a text. Remember, you said we're done. I met her wild, weeping eyes and I gave her the gift of my final, absolute truth. I said, got it. I meant it. I didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on her for the last time, leaving her sobbing on the steps next to the hollow shell of my father and the caged rage of my brother. The rain felt different now. It felt clean. I walked away from the 3 silhouettes muted by the glass and the gray, and I walked toward my partners. I walked toward myself. The fall of a house isn't a single crash. It's the sound of 1,000 tiny breaking things long after the walls are gone. My new office was my old office, but the ghost was gone. The brass Wilson Heritage Homes plaque had been torn down, leaving a scar on the wall. I'd replaced it with a simple frosted glass pane, Aegis design. The air inside, once thick with lies and entitlement, now smelled of fresh paint and industrial-strength coffee. For 3 weeks I didn't design. I just cleaned. I sat at the head of the conference table with Michael and a team of forensic accountants sifting through the wreckage. It was hard, grinding, miserable work, untangling fraudulent contracts, renegotiating defaulted loans, and fielding panicked calls from creditors. But it was honest. With every lie we unwound, the air got a little cleaner. I rehired the old staff, the ones who had been loyal to the work, not the name. Maria, the office manager Julian had fired for budgetary reasons, she'd asked too many questions about his expense reports, was the first person I called. She cried when I offered her the job. The pile of mail that had accumulated was a monument to the disaster. Most of it was legal, but one letter stood out addressed to me in a childish, angry scrawl. It was from the county jail. It was from Julian. I read it standing up. The first page was a torrent of rage, pure uncut venom. I was a bitch, a snake, a jealous, spiteful, unnatural thing that had destroyed his life. He threatened me. He threatened Michael. He threatened to sue me from prison for the rest of my life. The second page was different. The anger collapsed into a pathetic, sniveling plea. He was scared. He was sorry I felt this way. He didn't know what he was doing. And then the hook. Millie, you have to write a letter to the judge. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him I'm not a bad person. Tell him I'll pay it all back. You're my sister. You're the only one who can fix this. You're the only one who can fix this. The old refrain, the family anthem. I didn't burn it. I didn't save it. I just tore the letter slowly and methodically into 4 perfect squares and dropped them into the recycling bin. I felt nothing. The next visitor didn't write. My father just appeared. One afternoon, Maria buzzed my intercom. Amelia, your father is here. He doesn't have an appointment. I told her to turn him away, but the exhaustion in her voice told me this was different. It's okay, Maria. Send him in. He walked in holding an old battered fedora, the one he used to wear on job sites. He wasn't the patriarch. He was just Marcus. He looked thin gray and profoundly tired. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for a job. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just stood in front of my desk, twisting the hat in his hands. I was cleaning out my desk at the house, he said, his voice a dry rustle. He placed a small, tarnished silver frame on my desk. It was a photo of me, age 9, wearing his hard hat, which fell down over my eyes. I was grinning, holding up a poorly made birdhouse. You were always the real builder, Amelia, he whispered, not looking at me. You always were. I couldn't see it. Before I could find a single word, he turned and left, walking out of my office, out of my building, out of my life. I didn't call him back. Later that night, as the city lights began to glow, an email came through. It was from Chloe. The subject line was just Ohio. The email was short. I'm filing for divorce. I'm taking the kids back to my parents in Ohio. I can't be a Wilson anymore. I just wanted to say, thank you, and I'm sorry. I closed the email. The office was quiet. The accountants were gone. Maria was gone. I was alone, surrounded by the guts of a company I'd just bought, and a family I'd just lost. But for the first time in my entire life, I didn't feel lonely. I took a deep breath of the paint and coffee-scented air. I felt clean. 1 year later, the late autumn sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows I'd designed. The air in the new Northwood Community Center smelled of fresh paint sawdust and the barbecue smoke wafting in from the lawn. This building was all clean lines, warm Douglas fir, and light. A living, breathing space. It stood on the exact patch of muddy, blighted land that had been the graveyard of Julian's first failed condo development, a scar on the town for years. Now it was a centerpiece. The grand opening wasn't a gala. There were no suffocating chandeliers, no strained smiles, no one doing CPR on the catering. Instead, children from the local elementary school were running on the new grass, their laughter echoing off the glass. A high school jazz band was playing slightly off-key on the new amphitheater stage. It was real. You did good, Amelia, Robert Henderson said, clapping me on the shoulder. He and the rest of the Northwood Builders Consortium were gathered by the patio, their businesses solvent, their families secure. You really did. I was laughing, a real unrestrained laugh, the kind I hadn't realized I'd missed. I wasn't hardened. I wasn't bitter. I was just light. I was finally profoundly free. I turned, holding a simple cup of seltzer, to thank the mayor. That's when I saw her. A flash of movement out of place across the park, by the bus stop on Elm Street, a lone figure standing perfectly still watching. My breath caught the bubbles in my drink, dying. Even from 100 yards, I knew that posture. It was my mother. She wasn't the polished, pearl-clad matriarch of Wilson heritage. She was just Eleanor. A thin woman in a beige coat that looked too big for her. She looked frail, diminished, and utterly alone. She must have felt my eyes on her because her head snapped up. Our gazes locked across the expanse of green grass. The band played, the kids shouted, the world kept turning, but for one long suspended moment, everything went silent. I saw the ruins of her life in that stare. The defiance was gone, the spite was gone. There was nothing left but the ashes. All the years of rage, the acidic betrayal, the deep agonizing sorrow, it had all burned away. It was over. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just stood there, and I gave her a single, slow, deliberate nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an invitation. It was an acknowledgement. It was a closing. It was goodbye. She held my gaze for another second, then something in her seemed to break. She flinched as if the small gesture had been a physical blow. She turned her back. A moment later, the city bus arrived with a hiss of air brakes. She got on, didn't look back, and the bus pulled away, its diesel smoke fading into the bright, clear afternoon. For years, I'd been trying to patch the cracks in a foundation that was rotten from the start. I thought my job was to save Wilson heritage. I was wrong. My job was to save Amelia Wilson. The old house is gone, but the blueprint is mine. And this time I'm building on solid ground. And just like that, the old rotten house is gone, and the new blueprint is finally hers. What did you think of Amelia's final decision at the auction? We read every single one of your thoughts, so leave a comment below. If you want more stories of betrayal and resilience, be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.